yourself, and then we'll.
Sure. And thank you for reminding us to record. Whoever was that put that in the chat. Yeah, so my name's Clayton Stinson. I've been an integrator for longer than I knew what it was. I think prior to being introduced to EOS, I was kind of fulfilling that kind of a role, but I didn't have a name for it. I didn't really have a vocabulary to describe what I was doing. About 5 years, I've been an integrator now. I started off full time, and then more recently been doing fractional work. And the last couple of years been focused a little more on coaching in this area, and doing a lot of reflection on what works and why certain things worked, what I've learned, from my experience and et cetera. So just excited to share some of the things that I've come up with today to try to help you guys to have better relationships if you're an integrator or a visionary.
Yeah. Awesome. And anybody along the way here, if you have questions, just put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat. We'll try to answer them along the way. If not, we're going to have lots of time, at the end to answer them, because we want this to be a conversation, not a PowerPoint presentation. You're not going to see any PowerPoint. So, um, so cool. So Clayton, why did you want to talk about this topic today, and why does it even matter? I know you maybe shared a little bit right there, but tell me more about that.
Yeah, so 15 years I've been working with dozens of visionaries, and I've experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if you're an integrator, I think you know what I mean. And particularly my first visionary, there was a whole lot of ugly. It was 7 years that I worked with him, and um, I loved it in some ways, but in other ways, to be honest, I wanted to quit like every 90 days, probably for 7 years, because I just didn't understand him. And I'll get into a little more about that later, but I just feel like those 7 years of pain, I've seen how it's been used to help people. And so that was the big part of why I want to do this today. It's also a very common problem that I hear about. I started something called the Christ Centered Second in Command Network almost a year ago. And in starting that, I started having a lot of conversations with integrators. And in those conversations, it became pretty aware that to me that it's very common that people are frustrated with their visionary and they need help. And I also feel like if I can help and I don't help, I feel like it's irresponsible. So I've seen, and also I've seen what's possible if you do this
Hmm.
right. I've had some pretty amazing relationships with visionaries.
Oh, Nick's home.
Oh, sorry.
Got it.
You got it. Okay. And yeah, and so I've seen what's possible. I've seen how it can benefit not only the visionary and integrator because they get to work in their unique abilities and enjoy their role more, but I've also seen how it can benefit the entire company and their families and the community. And it can be, a very impactful relationship if you do it right, but it can be painful if you do it wrong.
Yeah. So what do you think keeps visionaries and second in commands from actually working well together?
There's a lot of things that could be brought in, but I've kind of brought it down to four. I think are the main things. So one is pride and judgment,
Hmm.
and just really not trying to understand the other person. And in my experience, it leads to bitterness and potentially resentment. So that's the first one. The second one, I think, is just a lack of commitment to the relationship. And what I mean by that is just like not bringing your best self to the table, not prioritizing meetings, like not investing in the relationship. The third thing I think is blind spots, just a real lack of self-awareness and a
Hmm.
lack of humility to really open yourself up to feedback. And then the last thing I think, and which is kind of similar, is lack of openness and honesty. And when I say that, I don't mean just um, me being like, if you were my visionary, Brian, like me being open and honest to you and telling you what I think, but also like Brian, you being open and honest to what I have to say and listening and
Two-way
hearing.
street.
Yeah, in hearing, both sides of it. So those are kind of the four things, the main things I think. There's more to it than that, but I think those are the core things that I've seen over the years.
So, with all these things in mind, and basically the limited time we have, I know you're talking about there's much more. What can you share that would help the second in commands or the integrators to improve their relationship and really decrease the frustrations that they have?
Mhm. I want to say that today is designed for the integrator. Uh, so I'm going to be speaking from the integrator's perspective. I am working on another one that will be speaking from the visionaries perspective, and I'm excited for that. I'm going to do that in the new year. I don't have a date yet for it, but yeah. So today is for the integrator. So what I like to ask is for the integrators that are here, when I said those things, right? When I said pride, lack of commitment, blind spots, and lack of open and honesty, my question is to you, and I don't want you to answer this verbally or in the chat or anywhere, but I want you to just think, who did you think, what was your initial response? Who did you think was more guilty of those four things? Was it you or was it your visionary? And like I said, just use your inside voice to answer. And I'm just curious, like in your own mind, what do you think your initial reaction was? Was it, pointing the finger at the other person, or was it pointing your finger at yourself? And don't answer, but just put that away in your head for future, because we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And just going to tell a story that's kind of unrelated, but we'll bring it back. Recently at my church, I was in a communication and conflict course for married couples, and the pastor asked the group, what do you think the biggest reason that couples come for counseling is? And this I do want you to answer in the chat. And I'm just curious, what do you guys think is the biggest reason that couples come for counseling? Just throw it in the chat. It could be anything. I just want to see what people say. Rick, Rick said their spouse to fix the other person. Poor communication. I've heard people say money, sex, like the typical reasons that we fight, trouble communicating. Yeah, trouble communicating. And that's here, communication, sex, and money. So what our pastor said was it's their spouse. They wish their spouse would change. Right. And he does a lot of marriage counseling. So he's pulling from his own experience. And I think we all know in theory that the approach of wanting our wife or husband to change, or in this case, visionary or integrator to change, will not work. And if we approach someone in that way, they will get defensive and resist change. And I know that because I did it. I've done it with visionaries. I've done it with my wife, and it doesn't work, right? You can't change your visionary. So sorry if you came to here thinking today that I was going to tell you how to change your visionary. That's not what we're talking about today.
That's a visionary one.
Yeah. So stop trying to change them. Back to the question you asked earlier that I asked earlier and that you answered with your inside voice. Do you feel that your visionary is the problem? So today I'm going to challenge you to see it differently, because you can't change them. So we're going to focus on things that you do have control over. And that's definitely not one of them. You can't change your vision, and there's nothing you can do. So there's four things that I'm going to talk about today that you can change that will improve your relationship. And the good news that it doesn't require anything from your visionary. So the first one is your perspective. And it's your perspective about their shortcomings and them being different from you. So if you're an integrator or visionary today, you know that your counterpart is very different from you. I don't have to explain that. I don't have to go into details about that. But I think the danger we can fall into is that we place judgment on them for their difference. And that will undermine and destroy your relationship. And also, we can even take it further to the point where we believe something's wrong with them. And I don't think you'd say that out loud, but this is what I felt with my first visionary. I thought something was wrong with him. And, I'm not super proud of that. And I never would have said it out loud, but it's just the reality. He was so different. I didn't have EOS then. I didn't have rocket fuel. It was my first office job, so I didn't really have a good understanding of what was happening and why I felt the way that I felt. But I blamed him for most of the problems that we had in our relationship, and that really, made it hard, I think, for him to trust me. I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm sure that it made it drew it put a wedge between us over time. And I remember nearing the end. I was there 7 years. I remember nearing the end thinking, man, we desperately need a buffer between the visionary and the rest of the team, just like EOS teaches. Uh, and I couldn't understand why he wouldn't promote me to that role. But I know what now, right? It's because I was judging him, right? And he could sense that he couldn't trust me. So I'm just gonna shift gears a little bit because I watched this video a while back, and it's so powerful, and it's not really about the visionary integrator, but it's about ADHD. And I believe, and over a lot of conversations, that I think a lot of visionaries have ADHD, and I think it's a great example of how we can label someone. And so I'm just going to play this video. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, but he's a professor that works and therapist that works with kids that have ADHD. So I'm just going to play this video, and Brian, if you can just confirm that you can hear it.
And so I tell kids, I say, okay, 10 years old, little boy sitting there with his parents, I've got great news for you. You've got an amazing brain. You've got a Ferrari engine for a brain. Your brain is one amazing, powerful engine. But you've got a problem. You've got bicycle brakes. You can't stop when you need to. And that's going to get you into trouble. You're going to crash and burn. And I said, but I'm a brake specialist. So I'm going to help you learn to control this amazing engine so that you can win races, so that you're a champion in the making. And they leave my office, instead of grieving the fact that they've been giving this diagnosis, celebrating and motivated to do the tremendous work it takes to build those brakes so that they can become champions. And if you look even at the three symptoms we call the cardinal, Russ Barkley calls the holy trinity of ADD, distractibility, impulsivity, and hyperactivity, turn each one on its head and you get a positive. Distractibility, turn it on its head and you get curiosity. Impulsivity, that's bad, right? Turn it on its head, you get creativity. You can't be creative if you're not impulsive. You don't say time for my creative thought and lay it like an egg. Creativity depends upon disinhibition, depends upon spontaneity. And hyperactivity, believe me, when you get to be my age, I'm 61, I'm very glad I've got that, it's called energy, and so my job as the clinician is to turn these things to help them control that massive brain power they've got so that they can be creative, they can be curious, they can be energetic, instead of being damaging, destructive, underachieving, and making a shambles out of their lives. I can't tell you how many tremendously successful people, and I'm so glad to hear the research saying you're out of the woods, how many tremendously successful people have this trait, as I think of it. And I'll close with one quick anecdote. David Neeleman, the founder of JetBlue Airlines, has big time ADD. And he's the man who invented the electronic ticket, a huge innovation, typical ADD, think outside the box. And I think it's somehow fitting that the man who has ADD, who thinks of a way for us to go to the airport, not have to remember to bring our ticket. But he's got massive ADD. And the day JetBlue went public, in a matter of hours, he made hundreds of millions of dollars. And driving home that night, he said to me, was I driving home to celebrate? He said, no, I felt like the same loser who couldn't hack it in high school. That is what we've got to stop. We have got to stop the punishing negative energy that so often surrounds these kids, and instead say, look, You've got amazing talents that maybe don't get measured in a classroom, but boy, they'll be measured in life. As long as you don't acquire the real disabilities, which are shame and fear and loss of hope and giving up on yourself. That's what we need to do. We need to talk about unwrapping gifts, not simply treating disabilities. And to me, that's the breakthrough that I hope I have a hand in ushering forward.
So the reason I wanted to share that is just that I think when we as integrators label our visionaries, you know, and judge our visionaries, we're putting them into that same kind of a place that maybe they were in before when they were in school, right? And imagine, you know, I love, my favorite part there was we are unwrapping gifts, not simply treating disabilities. You know, it is a beautiful thing, the mind of a visionary. Yeah, it doesn't make things super easy in some ways for us integrators, but we have the opportunity to empower them to work within that gifts and compensate, you know, for the weaknesses and challenges that they have. And it's a beautiful thing if you can do it well. So that video hopefully turns it on its head, like he talked about, like flipping that over, right? Like distractibility is curiosity. I just thought it was a very powerful video. And the other thing I'll say is, if who would really want to have the closest person in their business approaching them as if something is wrong with them? They'll sense it and it will erode trust. So, and the other side of it though is that you also have shortcomings. So give some grace to your visionary, because you're going to need some as well. So practical action step, and Brian, maybe you have that book right there with you, the Driven book.
Oh,
I
yeah,
would highly, and I have it too on the floor here. That's a great book. If you want to try to understand your visionary a little better, I'd recommend you read that book. I'll send out an email afterwards. And then there's a second book, which I don't have a hard copy of it. It's called Renegades by Benj Miller. It's a recent book that came out. Benj used to be an EOS implementer, and now he co-started System and Soul, which is another operating system for businesses. So that's the first one. Change your perspective. So change the way you see your visionary. And then the second one is change your approach. And this one's really about commitment to the relationship. And I was hoping Justin would be here, but he's not. There's an implementer that I met. He told me a funny story, and I'm gonna try to tell the story. And I would have preferred if he was here to tell it. But basically, he said that he was an integrator. He had a very great relationship with his visionary. And he said, yeah, he told me the story that his visionary would come into his room and he would launch into like 10, 15, 20 great ideas and tell him all these ideas. And Justin said his response was, all those ideas suck. Get out of my office. And I'm going to pause there. I'm going to ask you, how many of you, if you're an integrator, think you could say something like that to your visionary and get away with it? Right? Like that, just be like, okay, and leave. And because that's what his visionary did. So I'm just curious, like, put in the chat, yes or no. Do you think you could get away with that or not? I'm just curious what people think. No. No way. No, that's rude. No. Depends if the culture is open, honest, and vulnerable. That's a good answer, Rick.
Totally.
So I asked him, why do you think you could do that? Like, after I stopped laughing. And he said, because if he had a good idea, I would tell the entire team to stop everything and implement it. And he knew that. So deep level of trust, right, in that relationship. And just an example of what's possible if they're like, I think you did it well, Rick, there. Depends if the culture is open, honest, and vulnerable. That's awesome, right? If you can do that. It's not common, but that's the goal, right? If you can get to that place where it's like, you know what, I'm not defensive. I'm not taking things you say personally. I trust you. Like, all the best relationships I've ever had, I've been able to say things like that to them. And they're like, ooh, that hurts a little bit, but you're right. You know, and I think that's the relationship we're after. I can tell you another story about this, which is great. Is a great example I was referred to an integrator this earlier this year, and I started coaching him. In the second meeting, he said, "Clayton, my visionary is driving me crazy." And I said, "Okay, well, tell me a little bit about it." And he told me a little bit about it. And they're both very strong personality. Actually, this integrator's probably got a little more visionary than most integrators. And basically, I used to be a pastor, so I said, I've got a proverb that I'm going to tell you, and a story I'm going to tell you that I think is going to have an impact. And I said, so the proverb is, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And I said, have you ever sharpened a knife? And he said, yeah, I've sharpened a knife before. I said, so it's all about the angle, right? It's all about getting the angle right. If you get the angle right when you sharpen a knife, you can make it razor sharp. But if you get the angle wrong, what you'll do is you'll dull it, or you'll damage it, or you'll make it brittle. And I said to him, it's the same thing in your relationship with your visionary. You got to get the angle right. You got to approach it right, or you'll cause damage. And I said to him, if I were to ask you if you had the angle right in your relationship, what would your answer be? And he paused for a minute and he said, I could probably adjust. He said, I use my intellect to attack when I don't get what I want. And I need to stop that. And I said, okay, well, think about that. And then next week, let's talk about it, because it was the end of the call. And he ignored me, and he just went straight to his visionary. And this is better advice than I gave him. He went to him and he said, hey, Clayton told me this, this proverb. He explained the proverb to him, explained the whole analogy to him. And he apologized. He said, I have used my intellect to attack you, and it's not right, and I need to stop. I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive me. I'll work on it.
Wow.
And the visionary accepted that apology and owned some things as well, and their relationship improved right away. And the visionary actually reached out to me a couple weeks later and said, hey, whatever you're doing with Sean is working. I'd like you to coach us together. And I coached them together for 7 weeks, and their relationship is much better. So, but the thing was, they were willing to commit time and be humble, and they were willing to put their agenda, their perspective, and their feelings aside and do what was best for the relationship, also taking into account what's best for the company. And the reality is, sometimes what's best for the company is that we need our counterpart to expose our blind spot. And
yeah, there's something else here, Clayton, I want to focus on, because in the beginning, you talked about, the pastor said the spouse, that they wanted the spouse to fix, and you asked everybody who needs to change.
mm-hmm.
And what I noticed here, like what I noticed in my relationship with my wife, I always used to want her to change. Like if she just changed, right, my life would be great. And then when I started changing, she changed, right? The world changed, right? But you mentioned something here about he went and I'll say, told on himself. And then something else happened. The visionary did the same thing. So talk more about that dynamic, because I think that's important. We can't gloss over that.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I can identify it's the same thing in my marriage. So I'll use the marriage story because I think that analogy, because it's powerful. So my wife and I often will get in an argument, and it'll escalate. And eventually, the only way it stops is if somebody humbles themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember listening to a podcast recently, and the guy was talking about this dynamic, and he said, he asked the crowd, it was like there was a crowd in this podcast, and he asked the crowd, who do you think should humble themselves? And different people were like, some people were like, oh, the husband should, oh, the wife should, whatever. And he said, no, the one that's most mature should. And I was like, ooh, that kind of hurts a little bit, right? But he said it's interesting when you put it that way. It's kind of a contest. You want to be the one that's the most mature, and it's interesting, since this marriage counseling course that my wife and I are in, or not marriage counseling, but this marriage course that we're in, we just really, we learned some things and realized that we need to be quicker to humble ourselves. And the couple times recently we started to escalate, and one of us just quickly humbled ourselves, and it diffused the whole thing, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, Brian, but yeah, it's like if you value the relationship and the other person over yourself, you'll do that much quicker, right?
Yeah, and I think when you own your part, it prompts the other party to own theirs.
Yeah.
I'm not guaranteeing it, but I've
No.
just seen it happen so many times.
Yeah. And you know, this is another challenge with visionary integrator, like, and I'll go here because I think it's important. Um, if you consistently humble yourself and own your part and the other person doesn't, you might want to decide that this isn't the right fit, right?
100%.
I think you can't change them. But if they, don't value you enough to own their side of it, and you continuously do that, own your side of it, and they won't reciprocate, then, it's probably a good sign that you may want to move on, right? In my opinion, I don't recommend divorce. I have very strong opinions about divorce, and I'm committed for life, but in a marriage, but in a visionary integrator relationship, I think they're not all relationships are rightly matched. The other thing I think, if I'm explaining this to you, you might think, like, how do I do this? Like, how do I realistically have this kind of a conversation, or how do I expose a blind spot in my visionary? What I'll say is intent matters more than technique.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is, if your intent is to be right, to win, to get them to change or make your life easier, it won't work. It'll end badly. It'll escalate. It'll be a fight. But if your intent is to help that person, to do what's best for the company, to help them to overcome something that is a limiting factor. And I'll give you an example. I had a great call with an implementer this morning, and she said the biggest turning point in her business was when someone told her something hard to hear, really hard to hear. And she went from, a fairly successful business to working 4 days a year now.
Wow.
On her business, and making almost as much money because of the blind spot that was exposed in her. And she's going to be in the next webinar, and she's going to share that story. She said it was the best thing that anyone ever did to her, was expose a blind spot to her. And I would say it's the same. It's been the same for me. There's been multiple times in my life where people have exposed something that I didn't see. Anyway, so practical action for this one: humble yourself about something that you need to stop doing. And like Sean, my integrator story that I shared, and communicate it to your visionary. But my advice also is, don't expect anything in return. Don't go into it expecting them to own something as well. Do it with no strings attached, apologize, and deal with it, or humble yourself and recognize it. And then the second one for this one is, check your motives. Are you offended about anything? Is there anything between you that needs to be addressed? For the good of the relationship and the company, enter the danger and work through it. All right, like, just do it. Like, the longer you leave it, the harder it'll be. All right, so third one is, the third thing you can change is your communication style. If it's not working, change it. My advice is just learn to speak their language. Don't try to speak yours only. I got a kind of a funny story. I don't know if you guys have heard of the book Love, the 5 Love Languages. But I jokingly say that the second in command, the integrator's love language is spreadsheets. The visionary's love language is brief and amazing. My first visionary would say that. He's like, I don't need the details, just give me brief and amazing. Get to the point, tell me the bottom line, and move on. I got stuff to do. Right. And not every visionary is like that, but a lot are. And I would say, but if they're not like that, like, find out what their language is. Like, what do they want to know? right? There's different things that are important to them. So learn what is important to yours, ask questions, then ask more questions. Why do you not like that idea? What's your hesitation on this? What do you want me to report on? What do you not want me to report on? How much detail you want? Like, just ask a lot of questions and learn to communicate in the way that they want you to. And typically, one of the challenges of being a visionary is that usually visionaries aren't questioned by people in the company. Especially if they're the founder and they built the company from nothing. There's just an inherent intimidation factor, and you will earn trust with them if you ask good questions and challenge them respectfully. So, change the way that you approach those conversations. I'll tell you a quick story. My first visionary, I remember I once told him that I didn't feel like our team was very healthy. And he looked at me like I had three eyes. And looking back on it now, I can see how it was all intuition, what I said to him. It was just like, I could just sense it. And I think I was right. But it didn't compute for him. It was like, okay, why are you saying that? Like, what do you mean by healthy? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. And I didn't have any data. I didn't have any way to explain it. I didn't think through what the implications of it was. It was all intuition. And visionary does not understand integrator intuition. And I would say an integrator does not understand visionary intuition, right? Like, it's not enough, right? I might sense something is wrong, but I have to learn how to communicate it in a way that they can understand. So in this example, they may not care about team health unless they understand how it affects the bottom line, right? And what, putting an investment into team health, or even what team health is, right? What does that mean? Me saying that the team's not healthy doesn't really add any value. It may be of value to me, but it's not necessarily to him. So for this one practical action, there's a great book called Make the Noise Go Away by Larry Linney. I highly recommend that one. It's a good book just to make you think about what your role looks like. It's a short book too, which is nice. It's only about 100 pages. And it's written as a story, kind of like a Patrick Lencioni kind of style. And then the second practical action, and this one, I'm going to send this out in an email afterwards, because I think I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this was from the marriage course, actually, at the church. It said, he said, obey the 4 rules of communication. The first rule is speak the truth, which basically in EOS terminology, I would say enter the danger, right? Like I talked before, just go there, right? Second thing is stay current and prevent conflict. So don't let the sun go down on an argument. And I recently had Don Tinney in one of my webinars. He's a great guy. I've had a couple meetings with him. And he said the one thing that I appreciated most about Gino Wickman was that he never let the sun go down on an argument. If we had a sketchy interaction and we were driving home at the end of the day, he would call me and he'd say, hey, Don, I feel like I'm not happy with how that went. And I want to just talk to you about it and get it sorted. And Don really appreciated that. And I think it's important. Third one is attack problems, not people. Right. So let's get on the same side of the table. And then the last one was act, don't react. So think before you speak, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. I think those are 4 really good tips for these kinds of communication issues. And I realize I'm probably going a little long today, so I'm probably going to shorten up this last point. But the last thing I'll just say is the only other thing you can change that is in your control is yourself. Just be like relentlessly work on you, right? Never stop learning. One thing that I do is if there's something that I'm like, man, I just don't know enough about that, I'll buy 5 books on it and read them, right? And I'll just apply it and get better at that. Another thing, become an expert at hard conversations. That's a skill that integrator has to have. And I think some of the hardest conversations you're going to have are with your visionary, until you get that trust level built up, and you learn how to speak each other's languages. Get a coach, join a peer group, get counseling. Like, to be honest, my first visionary triggered me like crazy because he was so much like my dad. And that was hard, right? So, there was some things that I needed to process in my own personal life and overcome in order for me to not be triggered by him, because I've, needed to forgive my dad, right? For example, so there could be something like that, that you need to deal with as well. And then, do whatever you can to make the relationship work. But like I said before, don't stay somewhere where the visionary is not a good fit or is not willing to humble themselves. So we're just about to wrap up, but practical tip for this one: do a 360 evaluation on yourself with your team, right? That integrator that I told the story about that humbled himself to his visionary, I started coaching him and I'm like, man, like, you seem like just awesome. Like, I don't know what's wrong with you. Like, I don't know what to coach you on. So, but he was he wanted to coach. And obviously I ended up coaching him on his relationship. But I said, we need to do a 360 review, because, you sound great the way you talk about yourself. Right. So we did a 360 review with his team, and then we started coaching him on the things his team said. Right. So again, look for the blind spots. And then the second practical tip for this one is there's a book called The Only Leaders Worth Following by Tim Spiker. Absolutely love Tim. He's got a great podcast I'd highly recommend. And that book's a really good one for helping you to, go down this journey and work on yourself and become a leader that's worth following. So I'll pass it back to Brian. There was a little bit more I'd like to cover, but I'll do it in another context and get it out to you guys. So,
So we're going to open up to a Q&A here, and to kind of kick this off, I actually have a question from listening to you here, Clay, and then anybody, if you want to ask a question, just come off mute or put it in the chat. Please, we left a lot of time for Q&A. And my question, Clayton, is how much about this, from your perspective of going through this yourself and coaching people, is about a personal growth journey?
Huge. A lot. It really is. And maybe I will cover what I skipped, because I think it answers that question. So I created it. So my first fractional client did not go very well. And he lied to me. It wasn't a good values fit. And I ended up resigning because of it. And afterwards I thought, man, how do I make sure I don't work with somebody like that again? And I was reflecting on that, and like kind of the different types of visionaries. And so this is going to be kind of it'll come around. It'll make sense as I go. But I created something I called at first the visionary continuum. And I recognized that there's, in my opinion, 4 types of visionaries. There's what I call a flaming visionary. And a flaming visionary is the type of visionary that has a lot of awareness of their gifts, but no awareness of, or very little awareness of, their corresponding weaknesses. So I would describe it this way. Visionary is meant to be the spark plug for the organization, but a flaming visionary is sparks flying everywhere. It's, we have a lot of forest fires up here in Canada. We know sparks are not a good thing, right? It causes a lot of challenges within the organization. So my first visionary, I would say, was more of a flaming visionary, which made it very hard for me. And then I thought, well, the next step, because I've seen it in visionaries that I've worked with, is what I call the humbled visionary. So humbled with a D. So not humble, but humbled. And basically this is situational. They've gone through something where all of a sudden they've realized, I am not everything that my company needs. Right? It's failed. Like when you read, if you read Renegade by Benj Miller, he talks about this, where his business started to fall apart and he was humbled by it. And he started to realize, okay, I need help. Like I need someone, I need other people to do what I can't do. And then eventually the challenge with humbled is that you can easily slip back to flaming because it's a habit. It's just something that you've been doing for a long time. But if you continue down the path of development, you'll become humble, right? And now you start to surround yourself with good people that are different from you. So that's a personal growth journey, right? Like you at some point are humbled and then you become humble. And then I've also worked with visionaries that I refer to as enlightened. And I would say that they're so aware of their weaknesses that they can joke about it. The team can joke about it. It's fine. It's not a big deal. It's not a judgment thing. And it's beautiful, right? So there's a personal growth journey. So that's where I started this continuum. But then at some point I realized it's the same for integrators. I was a flaming integrator in my first role. I was so focused on process and people doing things right that no one liked me. Right? And no one wanted to listen to me because I was angry all the time because people weren't doing what they were supposed to do. Right? It's like, what's wrong with you people? I built a process. Like, do it. Right? Like, just do it. It's not that hard. It's not rocket science, but nobody liked me. Right? So I became humbled because it's like, yeah, I built a great process, but no one's following it. So what's the point? Right? So I had to go through a humbling experience and then become humble, where now it's like, okay, I now need to involve other people, right? I need to invest more in relationships. I need to get buy-in. I need to involve others in the process of developing these processes. And, and so again, it was a personal growth journey to get through. There was some hard stuff I had to go through, right, to get there. And the way I draw it, and I don't have a visual, the way I draw the continuum is the flaming visionaries over here, the flaming integrators over here. And as they move towards humility, they move towards each other. Right. And when you get to the center, the closer you are to each other, the better you're going to work. Right. So that's a central part of the coaching that I do is like, you've got to get humble, right? Like you have to go on that journey. So that's kind of a roundabout way of answering. Yes, personal growth is, I think, pretty central to it all.
Oh, it makes sense. I mean, you explained what journey to go on, not just saying yes as an answer. So Rick's asking, do you say that the flaming integrator has sparks fly when every misstep or process, even minor ones?
Yeah, I probably have analyzed this one a little less because it's me and I have to look in the mirror. Right? But I would say, yeah, the sparks are judgment and criticism, like just anger and just frustration with people because they're not doing what they're supposed to do would be similar. Yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else with questions? There's got to be some questions out there.
Have you used Kolbe as a explanation of, and especially with the A to A comparisons? I mean, both in the professional world and in private life. I mean, Kolbe didn't make any sense to me until I ran an A to A with me and my wife, who actually we ran the visionary and integrator type of personalities and roles in our business. Just didn't realize it.
Yeah, you know what? I haven't used the A to A yet, but I'm actually, it's funny you bring this up because I'm going to have my wife do it soon because yeah, I want to see.
I just printed one because I couldn't find it, but it's really powerful to give an explanation of where you work well together and where you should be in separate rooms.
Yeah, and I recently.
For those that don't understand, explain what it is because I'm not familiar with this, and I'm sure.
Oh, okay.
Rick, go ahead.
What is
Kolbe,
it?
Those four little numbers that I have on my profile. Kolbe is it's an assessment that measures how you instinctively take action when you're striving. So that means if you're motivated to do something, and you're striving, if you're working towards it, not pleasure, not just casually don't care about the outcome, but when you're working towards something, what do you need to do? What's the process and the steps and the action steps that you're instinctively going to take? And it doesn't measure your affective. It's not about what you like, because things we like change. This is how you instinctively take action. And there's 4 action modes. One is going after data. One is, or it's how you deal with data. One is how you deal with process and structure. The third one is how you deal with risk. And if you can go across my numbers right there. And the fourth one is how you deal with the physical world. So if Clayton and I were going to work together, the third number here is how we deal with risk. And Clayton, you are classic integrator. You're like slow and steady. By that 2, if we're driving up a mountain pass and there's a cliff on one side, mountain on the other, I'm going to be slamming. I'm going to be pressing the gas, going full speed, and Clayton's going to be
edge. Right on the edge.
You're going to be slamming on the brakes, and so between the 2 of us, we'll slowly get up the hill. And that third number is quick start, and that's like Clayton wants instinctively. He needs to know what the outcome's going to be before we take action. Where me, I don't care. I'm going to learn from the experience. And if you look at the other numbers, the 7 and the 8, I'm a 3 in my in structure, and Clayton's an 8. Clayton likes things. He needs to know how. The first thing he's going to do when given a task is, how are we going to do it? Me, I'm going to try things.
Yeah,
that's kind of what Kolbe measures. And knowing what your instinct is incredibly powerful, and it makes sense for that integrator visionary role. I mean, I do Kolbe earlier than EOS says, because 1, I'm certified in it, but 2, it just allows me to know who I'm talking to. And I didn't even see Hanif has his in there too. So I mean, it's an amazing tool, and I would highly recommend it.
And the 8A matches you up, like says, hey,
Yes.
between you 2, this is how you 2 work together.
This tells you how you work well together, what you should, how to talk to each other, what you're going to expect when you're working together, how you both sort, store, and organize things, how you both deal with risk and uncertainty, how you both handle the physical world and spaces around you, where you collaborate really well. And here's, this is a really powerful one, how you take action. What is the first things that you are going to instinctively do when you are free to be yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to build a system.
Yeah, you're going to, like if we were given, you're going to first build the system, and then you're going to look at all the data. Me, I'm going to try things. I'm just going to play. I'm going to get my hands dirty, try playing with a bunch of things. Then I'm going to look at what we're dealing with. Here's a perfect example. If Clayton and I were going to go on vacation, Clayton's going to do all the research and plan out the trip every step of the way before we go. I'm going to just get on a plane, go, and then look around once I get there.
Yeah. And I'll just say, so recently I started an expert interview series that I'm putting on YouTube, and one of the interviews that's coming up is about this. It's about Kolbe, someone that's been certified for 17 years. And I asked her the question, like, what if I'm an integrator and I'm matched with a 10 quick start and I'm a 1? Is that going to work? And she said, well, I can't say like that it's not going to work, but because it might, but probably not. Right? Like, you're just so different, right? It's going to be hard. And she said, there's a rule of 4. You probably know about, Rick. If you're four or more different on any of the numbers, it's going to be hard, right? It's going to be hard. There's going to be conflict, right? And so it's going to be a really good interview. I can't remember the date that it's coming out, but
who are you interviewing?
Emily Melius is her name.
Okay, no, didn't come across her.
But she's great, and it was just a great conversation, specifically about the visionary integrator and how on
the report, the first thing that you get on page 1, how likely are you to conflict? I don't know if that's clear or not.
It's hard to see, but but that's good.
Let's see if I can get a light on that, but maybe not.
That's
But
okay.
that's immediately the first thing that it goes for.
Yeah. So she's gonna do have me do the A&A or whatever you call it with my wife and I, and that might help us too. You know, to really
It's worth whatever, I don't know, $30. But
Yeah.
they also have a personal version called Takes Two,
Mhm.
which will focus. It was written to go over vacation, chores, and money, whereas this one is more how you work together.
Right. Awesome.
Awesome. So before we wrap up here, anybody else have a question?
I was just going to make a comment to Clayton's presentation. Well done. I am an ex-integrator for the last 6+ years, and I am super convicted by what you said because I felt everything you said. It was
Sure.
all his fault. It wasn't my fault. I couldn't stand anything about him. It didn't end well. Sparks flew all the time. He was a 9 in the quick start. I'm a 3. All those things, and yeah, I placed blame, and he didn't trust me. That today was my takeaway was I caused him to feel like he couldn't count on me because I was always critical of him.
Wow.
And isn't that ironic? The thing that you do to try to build trust is the thing that breaks it down, right? That's the paradox in this
Yeah,
world sometimes, right?
yeah,
And we
because
don't fully understand the dynamic.
I felt it was my responsibility to
Exactly.
hold it together and make things happen, and be the glue that binds and all those kinds of things. And so I was righteous in my
Mm.
role and
Mm.
self-righteous in my thoughts about him.
Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing.
Yeah.
I've definitely been there too. Working on this for years, but definitely, and sometimes I have to catch myself. Certain things will trigger me more than others. Like, I'll be doing really good, but then a certain situation happens and it's easy to fall back into that, kind of feeling. But yeah, but then like you need people like that. We wouldn't have all these amazing companies and all these amazing inventions without them, because you have to have the people that are willing to just jump in and take risks without looking and going, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
To the point where my 24-year-old son is about to take a job on Monday with a classic visionary, and all these triggers as he's telling me these stories about their interview process and how things are going. And I'm literally saying, yeah, it's exactly like how it was. You're not gonna, you don't do it.
Don't do it. Run away.
I'm transferring the baggage to my son. It's crazy.
Well, I appreciate everybody taking the time again. And Clayton, as we wrap up here to get everybody out of time, any announcements or parting thoughts?
Yeah, a couple things. If anything today, was interesting to you and you'd like to have a conversation further about any of this, I'm going to drop in the chat a calendar link to be able to book a call. I'm happy to have a free chat, to try to help you with your situation. The second thing is I have a couple of cool webinars coming up in January that I just want to let people know about. First one is January 10th. I'm going to put this in the chat too. And it's going to be about anxiety. I'm not the speaker. I'm bringing in a guy who has a PhD and in this world, but we're going to talk about anxiety in the visionary integrator duo, how that affects the team, and what to do about it. And then the second webinar I'll let you know about is on January 24th, and that one's gonna be a little bit different. It's going to be a fireside chat with a successful visionary integrator duo. They're both EOS implementers now. Chris Jones is one of them. He's the visionary, and Frankie O'Brien is his integrator. And they're awesome. They're an incredibly great example of what it looks like to be healthy, but very different. So I'd love to invite you to that. There's links in the chat, and love to help you ever I can.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. We got a minute left, so keep a lookout for those other webinars. And Clayton, thanks for the awesome talk.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks for hosting.
Thanks, guys. That love language to session rooms. That's some good stuff there. Look, your love language, brief and amazing. Yours is spreadsheet. And they're different languages. I love that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Guys.
You ever
Take care.
take care. Bye.